Good morning, everybody. I'm going to be doing a reading entitled Equality in a Sea of Inequality. It's from the UUA, and it is by Peggy Clark. When this country was founded, the aspiration was high. The men who imagined it dreamed big, casting a vision of a world where all men were created equal, where rights were endowed by our Creator, transcending culture and the expectations of the day, where life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness would be allowed and enjoyed without infringement. It was a radical and new vision, born from Enlightenment optimism, inspired by scientific discovery. It was an intoxicating vision, as bold as the Protestant Reformation that swept all of Europe. And they had the hubris to believe they could make it happen. They staked their claim in the Declaration of Independence and institutionalized it in the Constitution. They elected their first president, and when he stepped down, relinquished power to return to the role of the citizen. Those founders believed they lived to see their vision realized. A new president ran for office, and the republic was up and running. It was done, a new world order. Those men weren't distracted by the genocide they inspired or the enslavement of other people they required for this nation to be born. They declared equality while swimming in a sea of inequality. When they declared all men were created equal, they meant white Protestant men. They didn't mean women. They weren't including Black people who'd been enslaved, or Jews, or Catholics, or people who didn't own land. They were so proud of their inclusivity, so inspired by their own cutting-edge philosophy, that they had no idea how narrow it was, how constricted, how small a vision. The men who wrote those words were calling into being a more perfect union. They were establishing justice, ensuring domestic tranquility, securing the blessings of liberty. They believed that they and the men of their generation would will this new nation into being. They would establish the structures required for such a grand vision. They would test it, and then it would be done. They didn't realize it would require many more people, many different voices. They didn't know how many generations would have to be a part of the creation of that dream, how long it would take before the nation they imagined would be made manifest. The soul of America has yet to be born. Slides, please. Okay, my presentation today is on the intersection of innocent work and Unitarian Universalism. And as Mary Sue said, my name, Mary Lou, sorry, is Jessa Webber. Okay, so what is innocence work? Next slide, please. Okay. So just a bit of like some definitions for my presentation. Actual innocence claim is when a defendant did not commit the crime for which they were convicted. And an exoneration is when a defendant gets relief of all the consequences of a criminal conviction, typically followed by a post-conviction examination of the evidence in their case that was used to convict them in the first place. An exoneree is someone who has been exonerated based on actual innocence, meaning they did not do the crime. That is like opposed to having like a self-defense claim or something along those lines. An innocence organization is a non-government entity that works to secure exonerations. And a conviction integrity unit is a body within a prosecutor's office that works to review its prior convictions. So a bit about my background. I grew up at the Birmingham Unitarian Church from when I was a baby until I was 18. I participated in religious education, I went to cons, and I did social justice projects along with the other youth there. I attended the University of Michigan for undergrad. I studied environmental policy, and I minored in law, justice, and social change. And this is when I first became interested in criminal justice reform, I interned at the Washtenaw County Office of Public Defender, and that's the first time I really understood the inequalities within our criminal justice system. Before that, I really had no clue, I guess, just how broken the system was. That inspired me to go to law school. I attended Notre Dame Law School, and that is when I had the opportunity to participate in the Exoneration Justice Project, which is a clinic in the law school where I was able to actually represent people who were claiming to be innocent and they were convicted in the state of Indiana. Bless you. Bless you. And during my law school education, I had the opportunity to intern at the Wayne County Prosecutor's Office Conviction Integrity Unit. So that is a body, like a separate office within the Wayne County Prosecutor's Office that reviews their old convictions coming from Wayne County. So people apply to either, well, they applied to the Conviction Integrity Unit. People would also apply to the Exoneration Justice Project. They would say, I'm innocent, I'm in prison, I'm innocent for the crime for which I've been convicted. Can you please look at my case? And then we delve into a factual investigation of what evidence was used to convict them. Is there any new evidence that can be presented to the court or presented to an elected prosecutor such as Kim Worthy to say, this conviction isn't valid, please give this person relief. And then following law school, I began working at the Cooley Law School Innocence Project, where I'm a staff attorney. And I work on cases from Wayne County specifically. And typically I work on cases that have a forensic angle. So we do DNA testing, ballistics testing, fingerprints, sometimes junk science like bite marks, which is not real science. But a lot of people have been convicted based on those, like junk science evidence, and we work to establish that those convictions aren't valid. And I get to work in collaboration with the Conviction Integrity Unit in Wayne County, where I interned, and other innocence organizations. There's a number of others in Michigan, such as the University of Michigan has an innocence clinic, and then there's the State Appellate Defender's Office. Okay. So just an example of one of our exonerees, Ken Nixon. He was exonerated in February of 2021 after serving 15 years in prison. My organization, the Cooley Innocence Project, represented him, and he was exonerated through negotiations with the Wayne County Wayne County Conviction Integrity Unit. So after we took the case on, we did some forensic testing. We uncovered a number of pieces of new evidence, and we presented those to the Conviction Integrity Unit. They agreed with us, and then they in turn presented the case to Kim Worthy, and she agreed that his case, that he was wrongfully convicted, and granted him relief in the form of an exoneration. So he was convicted of homicide and arson in 2005. A Molotov cocktail was thrown into a home, and 2 children were killed, and other members of the home were injured. And he was convicted based on the misidentification of one of the surviving children, who was, I believe, 11 at the time, and I believe there was a lot of issues of misidentification. The police told the kid, is this the person who threw the Molotov cocktail, and showed them a photo of Ken, which is a suggestive identification. There was testimony of a jailhouse informant. That's a big issue when it comes to wrongful convictions. So someone will be housed in a jail cell. The other person in the jail cell obviously has their own convictions pending. They'll go talk to the police and say, oh, my cellmate told me that he did the crime, that he's sitting in jail for, and I'm willing to testify at trial against that person in exchange for a deal on my own case. So in Ken's case, the person got a lesser, I believe they were prosecuted for a lesser offense because they decided to testify in Ken's case and say, Ken said he did it. Yeah. And then A police dog, this is like the forensic angle in this case, the police dog falsely alerted to the presence of accelerant on Ken's clothes and car. And I believe that dog was just barking. Like, I think the dog had been used in other cases too and was just not accurate at all. But unfortunately, that evidence was used in his case to convict him wrongfully. And this combination of evidence put him away for 15 years, where he was innocent the whole time and in prison. So a bit about the causes of wrongful conviction in our country. There are 5 leading causes of wrongful convictions. There's mistaken witness identification, perjury or false accusations. So both of those were present in Ken's case, along with false or misleading forensic evidence. And the other ones are false confessions and then official misconduct. So official misconduct typically occurs when the government fails to disclose evidence that is exculpatory to the defense. So this is a case out from the United States Supreme Court called Brady versus Maryland. And in that case, the Supreme Court says that the state is required to turn over all evidence to the defense team that could help the defense. And a lot of times they don't, and that is typically official misconduct. Official misconduct could also go towards the other areas or the leading causes of wrongful conviction, such as a false confession. The police could coerce somebody into testifying or into confessing and tell them, you know, if you sign this statement, you'll get out of prison or you'll get out of jail, we'll release you, and that isn't what happens. Or, you know, they can present like mistaken witness identifications, like such as in Ken's case, where they just showed a child the photo and said, you know, this is the person who did it, right? So they all kind of play within each other. Oh, and by the way, if you have any questions during this, you can ask me. This could be more of a conversation. So just raise your hand, I guess. Another big part of the issue of wrongful convictions is race. There are huge disparities in the criminal justice system in general, with the number of people of color who are incarcerated, and then those statistics also bleed over into the number of people who are exonerated or wrongfully convicted. So next slide, please. So Black Americans make up 13% of the United States population, but 47% of known exonerations. Black people are 7 times more likely to be wrongfully convicted of murder. A Black prisoner serving time for a sexual assault is 3.5 times more likely to be innocent than a white sexual assault convict. And this is a major cause is misidentification. So misidentification is just an issue in general. Like, people's memories are not as good as we think they are. And especially when there is suggestive lineups, people are very likely to misidentify an assailant. And cross-racial identifications are especially difficult just for the human brain. And then in drug cases, innocent Black Americans are 12 times more likely to be convicted of drug possession than an innocent white American. And if you want to know more about this, my sources is from the University of Michigan, has the National Registry of Exonerees, and that's where I got this from. So next slide, please. So this is just a bit of data. This is from September of 2024. There have been 3,586 exonerations in the United States since 1989, totaling almost 33,000 years lost between everybody that was wrongfully convicted, with an average of 9 years lost. It's a long time to spend in prison for something that you didn't do. And then in Michigan in particular, next slide, please. There have been 180 exonerations since 1989, with almost 2,000 years lost. And then about 10 years lost per case. And along with the innocent person who is in prison, during all this time that somebody is wrongfully convicted, typically the person who is actually committed the crime is out on the streets. They might be committing more crimes. They're a danger to the public. I don't think that the prison system in general is great, but I do also think that, if somebody, especially maybe in like sexual assault cases, typically if someone is wrongfully convicted, another person might be out there committing more crimes, and we've seen that before in a number of cases. And then also there's issues of money. So like our taxpayer dollars are going towards keeping people in prison who shouldn't be there. And it costs a lot of money to put somebody in prison and keep them in prison anywhere in the United States. Switching a little bit over to Unitarian Universalism in particular. There is a quote that is pretty popular now, is popularized especially during the Obama administration, which is, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice." But it turns out that that quote is actually taken from a Unitarian preacher from 1853, Theodore Parker. And he says, "I do not pretend to understand the moral universe. The arc is a long one. My eye reaches but little ways. I cannot calculate the curve and complete the figure by the experience of sight. I can divide it by conscience. And from what I see, I am sure it bends towards justice." So it's just, I think, a really great quote that summarizes kind of Innocence work in general. It is difficult. It is grueling. It takes years to get somebody out of prison. And the whole time you know that they shouldn't be there. It's like very taxing emotionally. But I feel like doing this work, you have to believe that there is a light at the end of the tunnel. So this quote makes me happy. And of course, I knew about the quote before, but then when I looked more into it and finding out it was actually from a Unitarian preacher, that made me extra happy since I was raised Unitarian Universalist. Okay, some relation to UU principles. I think Innocence work kind of goes to like a lot of principles, but three in particular. The justice, equity, and inclusion principle we discussed earlier, and compassion in human relations. The first principle, the inherent worth and dignity of every person. And then the sixth principle, the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. And then finally, I have some calls to action, ways you can support this work. You can donate to organizations such as the Cooley, next slide, and there's another slide, sorry. You can donate to organizations such as where I work, the Cooley Innocence Project or the Michigan Innocence Clinic. There's also the National Innocence Project. All these organizations are great. They do great work. In the last couple of years, there has been a new organization in the Metro Detroit area called the Organization of Exonerees. Because of organizations like mine, Michigan Innocence Clinic, and in particular, the Wayne County Conviction Integrity Unit, there have been so many more exonerations in recent years, which is great. I think this work is this movement is picking up. So even in Wayne County, the CIU has released, I think, 48 people in the last 6 years since they were established. So as more exonerees started to come out, they realized that there's just no support. So if you're paroled from prison, you kind of come out, you have a whole step-by-step guide to reestablishing yourself. You get your identification card, you have access to housing, food, clothes. When an exoneree is released, they normally are released within a day or a week. You just find out you're getting out, and then you come out to nothing. There was no support. Parolees had more support coming out of prison than somebody who was exonerated who never should have been there in the first place. So the Organization of Exonerees is a nonprofit that was created by exonerees and is run by exonerees to help other people who are exonerated and coming out of prison. And they're wonderful. And another thing you can do is you can vote. So you can elect progressive prosecutors who will establish and maintain these conviction integrity units. And you can support also legislators who are focused on criminal justice reform. Another part of my job, along with actually representing clients, is I do a lot of policy work. So I help to get bills drafted and passed within the Michigan legislature to try to make it so less wrongful convictions happen, and also make it so exonerees coming out have more support. So current bills, oh, and I will say, we had like 3 bills pending. These 3 bills, and the Michigan legislature shut down during lame duck at the end of December. They all died. Like a whole year's worth of work. It just died right at the end because people refused to do their jobs. They didn't show up. It's crazy. I don't know. But we have to reintroduce them this session and hope that they'll make it through. And so having legislators who support this kind of work from both sides of the aisle is so important, because this is not, in my opinion, a partisan issue. I think this is just something that needs to be done. So the current bills that we are now going to be reintroducing are amendments to the post-conviction DNA testing statute. So in Michigan, a lot of this work started in 2001 when Michigan passed a statute that allowed for people who were convicted to pursue DNA testing while they were in prison. Because prior to 2001, there really wasn't much DNA testing at all. And it's like, as the science has developed now over the last like 25 years in particular, it has led to a lot of exonerations. But the current statute doesn't include people who pled guilty. And there's been a lot of developments of like social science showing that people will plead guilty even if they're not guilty because they want a lesser sentence, or they're coerced into plead, like taking a plea deal. And I think it's 13% of DNA exonerations are actually people who pled guilty. So we want to make the statute more inclusive. There's also the Wrongful Imprisonment Compensation Act. So when people are released from prison, people are exonerated, you can bring a civil suit against the state of Michigan to get $50,000 for every year that you were wrongfully incarcerated. And I guess that sounds like a lot of money, but if you think about it, you were not out on the, like, you're not gaining equity during that whole time you're incarcerated, and you can't put a price on, you know, years of life that you missed. But that doesn't include people who are pardoned. So if you can't make it through the court system, you can't make it through a conviction integrity unit, but you get a pardon from the governor based on actual innocence, you're not entitled to that money right now. And there's other issues, but essentially we're trying to make that statute, like, improve it so it's more inclusive. And finally, we have amendments to the Freedom of Information Act. In the state of Michigan, you cannot get a police officer's disciplinary file, which makes it really hard to know what cops are bad and cops are going around to different precincts and doing the same things over and over, committing the same like official misconduct, because often officers, they might get like something on, an action might be brought against them by the police department, but before they're actually reprimanded for that, they retire. And then they go to work for another police department. And that's how the bad actors move around. And currently you don't have any access to that. So it's hard to establish these like patterns from officers. So those are our current like bills that we're trying to get through. But yeah, just supporting legislators and supporting prosecutors who are interested in actually pursuing criminal justice reform. So that is pretty much my presentation, but if anybody has questions, I think we have a little bit, well, no, we don't, it's 11:30, so. And I know you guys have your stewardship thing, but you know, you can reach out to me, I'll answer your questions. Thank you.